Welcome back. Today we are going to discuss about the circulatory system. The circulatory system, as you know, is a transport system, and its function is to pump blood and circulate the blood in the body. But why would the body need such a system? Well, if you wonder why the food that you eat end up being taken by the body cells, if you wonder why the carbon dioxide that is produced in the body, specifically the body cells, how is it eliminated from the body? If you wonder why hormones that are produced by certain organs can be carried to the target cells and effect a change or a reaction, all this is because of the help of the circulatory system. So here we have some functions that are stated that the circulatory system circulates oxygen to the body and eliminates carbon dioxide from the cells. This is very important because carbon dioxide, when it is produced by the cells in excess amount, it needs to be eliminated. If we do not have the circulatory system, then carbon dioxide would not be eliminated, and excess carbon dioxide is toxic to the body. The circulatory system provides nutrients to the cells. The circulatory system serves as a medium that removes and transports waste product of metabolism from the cells where they are produced to the excretory organs for disposal. So many cells that are functioning, they produce waste products. Because the cells do not need the waste products, they have to be eliminated from the body. And it is the circulatory system that can take part to eliminate those waste products. So the circulatory system circulates antibodies and white blood cells that protect the body against disease and infection. In our blood, we have antibodies, or some call it antibodies, and white blood cells. Whenever we have microorganisms that enter in our body that are harmful, the white blood cells and the antibodies work together to eliminate infections. And if there is infection in a specific organ, for example, in the lungs, which we call pneumonia, the white blood cells and the antibodies need to reach that organ. And the way they can do that is in the circulatory system. The circulatory system has to work, transport these cellular structures to the target organ. The circulatory system transport clotting factors and thrombocytes that are activated when needed to cause blood clot in order to stop bleeding. The blood has three important cells. We have the red blood cells, we have the white blood cells, and we have the platelets, which are also known as thrombocytes. So what the red blood cell does is it transports oxygen to the cells. The white blood cells protects or fights against infection. The platelets or the thrombocytes are responsible for blood clotting. So whenever you cut yourself and blood starts to come out, you will realize that after some time there is some blood clot at the area that is cut. That blood clot is partially or totally due to the presence of platelets or the thrombocytes. To just summarize, we say that the circulatory system transports oxygen, nutrients, hormones to the cells, okay, and eliminates carbon dioxide and metabolic waste product. So you can see how important the circulatory system is. Oxygen is needed by all cells. So imagine if a person is having a problem with the circulatory system, like people who have heart failures, whose heart cannot pump sufficiently to be able to transport oxygen sufficiently to the target cells. What happens? These individuals suffer exhaustion, they experience breathlessness. This is because circulatory system is important. There are cells or organs, for example, the brain, that cannot do without oxygen. If the brain cells do not have oxygen for a certain period, they die. Usually you see these cases in cardiac arrest when the heart stops to function or pump. So if the heart stops to function and the function of the heart is not restored quickly, vital organs like the brain suffer damage because of lack of oxygen. Okay. When we talk about the circulatory system, we are talking about the heart and the blood vessels. The heart is a muscular structure that contracts and relaxes rhythmically. It functions as a pump. When the heart contracts, it sends blood to the arteries, usually two main arteries, one going to the lungs and the other going to the system. The heart forms the double circulation. We will discuss all that. In summary, the heart is a muscular structure that functions as a pump, and it is the structure that forms the double circulation. When we talk about the double circulation, we have pulmonary circulation and we have the systemic circulation. So we have the heart, we have the lungs, and we have the rest of the body. The rest of the body includes all the other organs. Now, when blood is coming from the body to the heart, usually the blood is deficient in oxygen. So it needs to be oxygenated by the lungs and sent back to the heart so that it can go back to the body again. That is why the heart will send the blood to the lungs. And in the lungs, it gets oxygenated and carbon dioxide is removed from it. So you now have what we call oxygenated blood, a blood that is rich in oxygen. So that oxygenated blood will come back to the heart. Okay? And then what happens? The heart sends it to the organs. So this is why double circulation is needed. The blue is called the pulmonary circulation. Pulmonary circulation. And the red is the systemic circulation. To repeat myself clearly, the blood that is returning to the heart from the organs is deficient in oxygen. It has low oxygen. So as it reaches the heart will pump it to the lungs so that it can get oxygenated and carbon dioxide is eliminated from it. So the blood that is now in the lungs is rich in oxygen. It is transported back to the heart. That cycle from the heart to the lungs and from the lungs to the heart is called pulmonary circulation. The oxygen-rich blood reaching the heart from the lungs is now sent to the rest of the body. That circulation, bringing of blood from the body to the heart and back to the body, is called the systemic circulation. So we have two important circulation. One, sending blood that is deoxygenated to the lungs only. So it is called the pulmonary circulation, and the other is sending blood to the rest of the body, which is called the systemic circulation. So to establish pulmonary and systemic circulation, that is why we have the heart divided into right and left. The right side sends deoxygenated blood to the lungs, and the left side of the heart sends oxygenated blood to the organs. We will get into details of this later on. Blood vessels, we have the arteries, we have the veins, and we have the capillaries. The arteries are the blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. So they carry blood away from the heart. To the organs. The veins carry blood to the heart, okay, or towards the heart. The capillaries are small vessels, tiny blood vessels that connect arteries and veins, okay? They connect small arteries and veins. So to explain this, from the heart, blood goes into the arteries. The arteries then become smaller arteries, which we call arterioles. Okay, they become smaller arteries called arterioles. Then from the arterioles, you have the capillaries. And from the capillaries, you have the venules, small veins. And from the venules, you have larger veins, okay? Then veins, what do? They return the blood to the heart. All right? So from the arteries, you have the arterioles, then to the capillaries, then you have the venules, then the veins, then back to the heart. So what the capillaries do, we have talked about transport of oxygen, nutrients, and hormones. Actually, it is from the capillaries that the nutrients, the oxygen, the hormones get into the cells, okay, by different mechanisms like diffusion, active transport, and others, which will be discussed later on. To explain again, the heart, as it pumps the blood, it goes into the arteries. The arteries form small arteries called the arterioles. And from the arterioles, blood gets into the capillaries. At the capillaries, oxygen, nutrients, hormones get into the cells, okay? Because the cells need that to use. So the cell releases carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide is taken up by the capillaries. It moves to the venules, to the veins, and to the heart. From the heart, then to the lungs again for oxygenation, and the lungs eliminate carbon dioxide. Okay? So the capillaries are responsible for transporting oxygen, nutrients, and hormones to the cells, and carbon dioxide and other waste products are taken from the cells to the capillaries for elimination by the organs responsible. So if we should talk about the heart, the structure of the heart, this is the diagram. We have two important large veins that bring blood to the heart. This structure that you see here is called the superior vena cava. Okay, so the superior vena cava brings blood from the arms, which we call the upper extremity, and from the head. So blood coming from the hands and from the head comes through the superior vena cava to the heart. Blood coming from the abdomen, from the legs, come to the heart through the inferior vena cava. The blood coming from the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava meet in the right atrium. The right atrium is a chamber, okay? So as the right atrium contracts, blood comes here, called the right ventricle. So remember, we've said that the blood that is coming to the heart from the system or from the body is poor in oxygen. So that is why when it reaches the heart has to send it to the lungs for oxygenation and for the removal of carbon dioxide. The blood that is in the right ventricle has to go to the lungs through this structure called the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery divides into left pulmonary artery and right pulmonary artery in order to supply the left and the right lungs respectively. So that is why the pulmonary artery branches into two. You have one going this way and the other going this way, okay? It is behind the superior vena cava here, okay? That is we have the left pulmonary artery, and this one here is the right pulmonary artery. All right, I repeat myself again. The blood coming from the head and the arms comes to the heart through the superior vena cava, okay? The blood coming from the abdomen, like the liver, the kidney, the intestine, the spleen, and so on. The blood coming from these organs comes through this inferior vena cava to the right atrium. This is the first chamber of the heart where poor deoxygenated blood comes into. So from the right atrium, the blood is pumped to the right ventricle. And from the right ventricle, because the blood needs to be oxygenated and eliminated of its carbon dioxide, blood is pumped. The heart pumps the blood from the right ventricle to the pulmonary arteries. Into the pulmonary arteries, the blood that is going to the left lung goes through the left pulmonary artery. The blood that is going to the right lung is going from the pulmonary artery to the right pulmonary artery. The blood that is going to the left lung goes through the left pulmonary artery. The blood that is going to the right lung goes through the right pulmonary artery. So in the lungs, we said that the blood is oxygenated and carbon dioxide is eliminated. So when you breathe out carbon dioxide. Blood that is returning to the heart from the lungs comes through this structures. Okay, these are called the pulmonary veins, and you have 4 of them. Here you have 2 of them, and you have the other 2 of them shown here, but they open in the left atrium. Okay, the left atrium. So from the left atrium, blood moves to the left ventricle. When the left ventricle contracts, the blood is now sent to the rest of the body through the aorta. The structure that you're seeing here is the aorta. Okay, is the aorta. This is the aorta. So we will also talk about the 4 valves that we have in the heart. Remember, the circulatory system has valves. It has 4 valves in the heart, and the venous system also do have valves. Okay, let's name the valves in the heart. This valve is called the tricuspid valve. It is connecting the right atrium and the right ventricle. Okay, the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery, the valve that is there is called the pulmonary valve. The left atrium and the left ventricle, the valve that is between the left atrium and the left ventricle is called the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve. And the valve that is between the left ventricle and the aorta is called the aortic valve. Let's name them. The valve between the right atrium and the right ventricle is called the tricuspid valve. The valve that is between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery is called the pulmonary valve. The pulmonary valve. Okay, let me write that neatly. Pulmonary valve. Pulmonary valve. The valve that is between the left atrium and the left ventricle is called the mitral valve, or some call it the bicuspid valve. The valve that is between the left ventricle and the aorta is called the aortic valve. Now I will want you to understand this. The tricuspid valve and the mitral valve are called the atrioventricular valve. The atrioventricular valve, while the pulmonary valve and the aortic valve are called the semilunar valve or semilunar valve. Semilunar valve. Why is it that the tricuspid and the mitral are called the atrioventricular valves? It's simple, because they connect they are in between the atrium and the ventricles. The tricuspid valve is between the right atrium and the right ventricle. The mitral valve or the bicuspid valve is between the left atrium and the left ventricle. That is why they are called atrioventricular valves. The Aortic and the pulmonary are called semi-lunar valves. Semi means half, lunar means moon. So the shape looks like half moon. So, but what is the function of the valves? The function of the valves prevent the backflow of blood. Okay? Remember that the veins also have valves, and the function is to prevent the backflow of blood. So, what does that mean? We said that the valves prevent the backflow of blood. What it means is, for example, you have the right atrium, you have the right ventricle. The valve that is between them is called the tricuspid valve. Normal blood flow is blood moving from the right atrium to the right ventricle, right? So that is when the atrium contracts, blood will move to the right ventricle. This is the normal blood flow. But in an attempt that blood wants to move from the right ventricle to the atrium, what happens? The valves close. So the closing of the valve is what prevents the blood from flowing back. This is how the tricuspid valves function. It will allow blood to move from the right atrium to the right ventricle, but will not allow blood to move from the right ventricle to the right atrium. The same thing is what the mitral valve does. It allows blood to move in one direction, that is, from the left atrium to the left ventricle. But if the blood attempts to move from the left ventricle to the left atrium, the valve closes. And it is the closing of these valves that on a stethoscope you hear the lop-dop sound. So usually that lop is from the closure of the valves of the atrioventricles. Okay? The lop sound is from the closure of the atrioventricular valves, because at that instant they are trying to prevent the backflow of blood into the atria. So the closure of the semi-lunar valves is what gives you the dop sound. The lop sound, let me write that. You have the lop-dop, right? The lop sound is the closure of the atrioventricular valves. The dop sound that you hear is from the closure of the semi-lunar valves. Let's talk about systole and diastole. Systole means contraction of the ventricle. And diastole means filling of the ventricles with blood. Okay, so during systole, the ventricles contract, but during diastole, the ventricles relax. The diastole and the systole cycle will need to match the opening and closing of the valves. So let me just try to explain that by drawing a diagram that will not give much confusion. Okay. If this is the heart, this is the right atrium, this is the right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. I'm just trying to make it simple here. Okay. Now the valves that you have between the right atrium and the right ventricle, it is called the tricuspid valve. The valve that you have between the left atrium and the left ventricle, it is called the mitral valve, or otherwise called the bicuspid valve. So we've said that the blood that is in the right atrium moves to the right ventricle through the tricuspid valve. When the ventricles try to squeeze or try to contract, what happens? The blood can flow back to the right atrium or to the left atrium. Remember that the right ventricle wants to send the blood to the lungs, the left ventricle wants to send the blood to the aorta during contraction. So during that instant, what happens? If the valves do not close, blood will escape into the right atrium and the left atrium. Okay, so what happens during systole? During systole, the atrioventricular valves closes. During systole, the atrioventricular valves closes. But what is diastole? Diastole is the filling of the ventricles, like. So during diastole, what happens? The atrioventricular valves opens. Okay, during diastole, the atrioventricular valves open, but during systole, the atrioventricular valves closes. So the opposite will happen for the semilunar valves. So it means during diastole, what happens? We are filling the heart. If we are filling the left ventricle, you do not want the blood that is in the pulmonary artery or the aorta to come back to the ventricles. So during diastole, what happens to the semilunar valve? They close. Okay, the semilunar valves close. During diastole, the semilunar valves closes. Okay, so during systole, what happens to the semilunar valve? Semilunar valve opens, because during systole, what happens? During systole, the ventricles want to send the blood to the main arteries, which are the aorta and the pulmonary artery. During systole, the right ventricle wants to send the blood to the pulmonary artery, while the left ventricle wants to send the blood to the aorta. So that is why these valves will be open during systole. So during systole, the pulmonary and the aortic valves are open, but the mitral and the tricuspid valves are closed. Because when systole is happening, the intention is to send the blood to the pulmonary arteries and the aorta. If the tricuspid and the mitral valves are not closed during that instant, there will be backflow into the right and left atria. The structure that is separating the left ventricle from the right ventricle, it is called the interventricular septum. And in some individual, there could be a partition, there could be a hole, okay, or an opening. There could be an opening between the left ventricle and the right ventricle. When that happens, oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood mix. This is what we call ventricular septal defect. Okay, it's usually a congenital problem. Between the right atrium and the right ventricle, though it's not clearly shown here, the partition in between is called the interatrial septum. Okay, and when there is a defect or there is an opening between them, mixing the two blood, that is oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, is called the atrial septal defect. The atrial septal defect. So atrial septal defect, the defect is at the level of the atrium, okay, For the ventricular septal defect, the defect is at the level of the ventricles, okay, between the two ventricles. Okay.